All right. Greetings, everyone. This is Eric Stewart from Fishing Fanatics, and I have an awesome guest today, Greg Vision, who is a professional angler on the Major League Fishing Bass Pro Tour. And he's fished the Bass Pro Tour, the Bassmaster Elite, and the FLW Tour. He also has 23 career top 10 wins, and in 42 career top 20s. So, Greg, how you doing, man?
Great, man. Thanks for having me on, Eric.
Absolutely. Great to have you on. And I got to tell you, I was looking into your background a little bit, and you've been a bass fisherman for how many, 16 years?
Yeah, I've been doing it full time for 16 years. And man, that 16 years has gone by so fast. You know, I started out, I had a normal job, like everybody else, a cool job. I was working for the state of Alabama doing water quality monitoring, but, had gotten into the tournament fishing and started to do well. And my wife and I decided let's give it a year and see what happens. And I was really fortunate that my job I was able to do that. And I had a certain amount of time that I'd be able to return to that position. So it gave me a real, good opportunity that a lot of folks don't have, that I could go out and try and see what happens. And, man, every year for the past 16 years, it's the very next year is always like, let's see what happens, but I've been really blessed and getting to live a dream. It's not easy. It's a tough dream, but I love this roller coaster ride that's professional fishing.
Absolutely. And let's throw it all the way back to 16 years ago. You're working and you're like, man, I really want to try this thing. Who were some people that you talked to, maybe kind of pushed you over the edge a little bit, gave you that motivation to just, hey, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to try and really make a run at this thing.
Without a doubt, I'd say my wife. I think, I had a good friend that I fished local tournaments with, and, I talked to him. We actually worked at the same place with Alabama Department of Environmental Management and, fished some tournaments together and all. And other than my wife really, pushing me to, hey, let's, go ahead and let's give it a shot. I think we can handle it. She's in the financial industry, so she knows her numbers. I don't. I'm a fishing freak, so I'm glad we complement each other. But she was like, yeah, give it a shot, and let's see what happens. And this other friend of mine, when I told him I was leaving, my job to try, he said, you'll never be back. And I think he knew me better than I did. I think he knew the drive that I had. I think hopefully he noticed that I had some talent too. But for whatever reason, that stuck with me, because it surprised me that he said that. I thought I'd be back. I thought I'd go out there, give it a year or two, get it out of my system, and I'd be back, working at the state. And he's like, you'll never be back. And I'll never forget that.
Damn, that's a pretty awesome story. And going back to your college days, right? I looked up a little bit, some information on you. You were a college baseball player, right?
Yeah. Growing up, we didn't, I played all kinds of sports. I was a really good athlete. I played basketball, baseball, and football. So, I was a quarterback of my high school football team, and ended up getting a scholarship in baseball to play for Auburn University of Montgomery. We were a smaller NAIA school, but I ended up doing really well. I started out real slow there, but ended up doing really well. Found myself as a pitcher and was really good. It taught me a lot of life lessons, going through that. But we didn't have the high school, the junior, the college fishing, anything like that. The way I'm wired, and as passionate as I was about ball sports, I was twice as passionate about, fishing. So if I'd had that option, I might not have done it, but it was a really good experience. I made some great friendships that I still have today. And I got to play with 2 or 3 guys that were ate up with fishing and hunting as much as I was. And so we got along well, to say the least.
No, absolutely. And I played a little college baseball myself, not at the level that you did, cool. But actually where I found my love for fishing was I was down in the junior college down in South Jersey. And actually my roommate, we used to just stay up real late watching fishing videos. And at that point in my life, I wasn't really into fishing. It was kind of like, okay, I did some trout fishing here and there, but we would just stay up late watching fishing YouTube videos. And then one day we had a little runoff creek pond in the back of where we were living. We ended up climbing underneath the fence, and I threw a frog in there, not thinking anything was going to happen. Next thing you know, a big bass blew it up. And I was hooked from that moment on.
Look, yeah, it's so amazing. Like, everybody has that story of, that moment. We can almost go back, and all of us that are just, fishing fanatics now are, we had that moment in our lives, that we can look back to. Is that's the moment that I got into it, that I was hooked, and the rest is history. And, for me, it was, my dad was a fisherman. And, but I remember one particular trip, he took me on a few of them, but one stood out in particular. And it wasn't for bass. I had caught a bass or two, but it was actually, he took me out in the spring and nice warm weather, kind of like we're having in Alabama right now, and got to catch some crappie. But I remembered, I think the cool thing is that I was making the cast on my own. I was, I figured it out. I think that's the cool thing about fishing, and the rewarding thing is when you figure it out, whatever that is. For me that day, it was this little bitty smoke colored grub on a 16th ounce jig head. And I had a push button reel. I was probably only about 6, 7 years old. And, but I figured out the retrieve, the speed. And if you ever fished for crappie, like that bait's got to come through at just the right zone and the speed. And I figured it out and just caught, once I got it right, I caught them cast after cast. And I remember that as well as any good tournament that I've ever had was that day, figuring out how to catch those crappie.
That's awesome. And let's take it back to your college days, because there's one of these things that I like to draw comparisons to college baseball and any other competition, right? Where you're in the college baseball game, you're waking up at 6 a.m, you got weight room, then you got class, then you got practice, then you got weight room again. Those long days of just grinding and then competing during game day. Can you make any comparison between what it's like being a college baseball player to what it's like being a professional bass fisherman?
Oh, there's a ton of comparisons, and that I think that really, having that experience and playing college sports, especially with the Major League Fishing format with Score Tracker, where the score. I've played sports my whole life, knowing whether I was ahead or behind and having to deal with that and adjust going forward. Knowing that you've got to put the work in, that everybody, especially once I got to college, growing up, I was sort of just a naturally gifted athlete. So, I was good. Whether I practiced hard or not, I was good. When I reached that college level, my later high school and college level is when it really hit me that, okay, everybody's good. And I've got to put in the work. And I learned that the hard way, my first year or two, that you don't just show up and you're good, because everybody's good. You've got to put in the work and the drive, and you've got to think about it and strategize and really build yourself as a player and refine your skills. And I've taken that lesson to me, with me into professional fishing. I've always had that competitive drive, and I think that's something that's common across all sports. You see a lot of people that are good at one sport, but they can step into something else, and it's that competitive drive. And man, I'll tell you, nowhere else more than in fishing. When you're out there and you spend a 12 or 14 hour practice day and things aren't going that well, and you've only got a limited number of days to figure it out, and you're tired, you're exhausted and hungry, and and dehydrated and everything else, and then you got to find the motivation to get back up and do it all over again, and that's when you find out what you're made out of. And playing from behind, being down, knowing that you're getting your brains beat out, and what can you do to recover, and set yourself up, or during the course of the season, you're having a few bad tournaments. The last one I had at Toho, worst tournament I've had in probably 4 or 5 years, just a total bomb. And I like to get some momentum started early in the season. That was exactly the opposite of what I wanted. But mentally, I've got to adjust. I've got a whole season ahead of me, and I've got to, put that behind me, learn lessons that I can. And then going forward, I've just got to pick it back up and get that drive back and build that confidence back up that I can still compete.
I like it, man. And there's one of these sayings that we've always used in baseball. It's 27 outs. You got to get 27 outs one way or the other on defense in baseball to finish a game, right? So it's not over to the fat lady sings or that last out's made. And I got to see the similarities between that and like professional bass fishermen. Like maybe you're going into the last day and you might not be where you want to be, but that last day can make a hell of a lot of difference.
Absolutely. Going back to, I ended up being a sidearm pitcher, so I could throw a lot more innings than a normal guy, and that's what saved my career in college, was dropping down and throwing sidearm. And I like to say I was learning to skip a bait caster at the same time, and that arm angle is the exact same arm angle. So a friend of mine not too long ago, his kid was working on pitching sidearm. He likes to fish. I said, just tell him to go out there and work on skipping a bait caster all day. Don't pick up a ball yet. But, my last ball game I pitched was, and I knew it was probably my last game. We were in the conference tournament, and I started, and started, as our ace, and started the game. I've been solid all year. I gave up 4 runs, a lot of little dribblers. I gave up 4 runs in the first inning. Anybody else, their coach would have pulled them right there. But my coach had confidence in me, and he knew that if I could get it together, that I could carry us. And I finished out that inning somehow, 4 runs down. And they ended up throwing a 9-inning game. We beat them 11-4. And so, that's how I left my college career, was knowing, that I can be behind, but I can get it together and shut it down and be successful, and that's a special moment in college baseball. And it taught me a lot of life lessons too, about, keeping your head down and keeping your confidence up, and you can get through it. So, one of the things like with college baseball and ball sports, especially, there's a lot of, I used to try to get amped up, when I pitched. I wanted to get jacked up, and, almost like ready to go into a fight, that I pitched well like that and hit well too. And, fishing's a little bit different. It's so mental. There's a lot of art. Pitching was really, all sports is very mental, and you have to have that ability to focus. But the difference in fishing is there's a lot of art and intuition and making adjustments on the fly, instincts and things like that probably, with fishing is probably more important than it is in ball sports. And so that's, one thing that I noticed over the years that is different is sometimes you got to dial back that amped up, feeling so that you can focus and make decisions and be comfortable and relaxed and confident.
I like it, man. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about like strategies on fishing. And one of the things I'm yet to figure out is how to target fish during different like spawn phases, whether they're moving off beds, whether they're moving up shallow, moving on the beds. Tell me a little bit about what you've learned just through fishing and some tips for amateurs that you see for just locating fish during those different times of the spawn.
Yeah, we normally think about seasons, spring, summer, fall, winter. But in fishing, there's really the spawn is 3 seasons. You've got the pre-spawn, you've got the spawn, and you got the post-spawn. And there's a whole lot going on. And sometimes those cross over because you're getting different weather patterns. And it can change from lake to lake. So it can be tricky. You've heard the saying, think like a fish. I like to think that they react to their environment more than anything else. They're just like us. They want to be comfortable. They want something good to eat, and they want a roof over their heads. So when they're getting ready to spawn, they're not going to totally commit to an area where they're going to kind of be in a bad situation if the weather turns bad. So it's early season. The water's still cool. Let's say, and I'm speaking from the Southeast. It's going to vary between Southeast and other regions of the country. But when the water's, in the low 50s for us, that's kind of cool. Upper 40s, low 50s. Those fish aren't, they're going to stay out there where the water's a little bit deeper, because when we get a hard cold front, that surface layer is going to get really cold. But everything below that is kind of going to just sort of stay the same for a little bit. And that's their safe spot, where they're not real vulnerable to those hard, cold temps. Lately here in Alabama, we've had some extremely warm weather for this time of year. Normally our fish aren't coming into spawn to, say late March, but we've had at least a week of 75 to 80 degrees, which is highly unusual. Usually we'll get a 70-degree day and then it'll be followed up by a 20-degree day this time of year. So it's in a lot of flux, but we've had really stable conditions. And these fish, once they realize like, hey, it's been nice and warm for like 5 days straight. Okay, I think let's go. The water temperature's jumped up in the close to 60 degrees. And that's a mark, once you get to that, for us, like that 57 to 60, those fish know, okay, let's start creeping on up there. It may be, and a lot of your biggest fish will actually spawn a little earlier than anybody realizes. And that's one thing to keep in mind. That's the first thing, is you want to put yourself in a position to intercept those fish as they're moving in or moving out, depending on the conditions. And then you just adjust your bait selection and presentation to the type of water that you're fishing. Once those fish come in, you get a nice stable weather system, especially like a full moon is a good trigger for spawning fish. It's not a must. Like last week we had fish spawning around here. It wasn't a full moon. It was just nice and warm. The water got up to like 62, and there were some fish that's like, hey, it's time to party, let's go. And so some come on the moon, and some come on what we call photo period, day length. There's certain fish that come in with when the weather's right, and there's other fish that come in that when it matches up with day length and the moon phase. So you sort of, it'd be hard to do in a podcast to explain it in depth, and so I'm doing my best to kind of condense it a little bit. But you have to think like what those fish are wanting to do. And, the biggest thing to remember is once those fish come in, when we get some really hard weather, if they're not committed to the beds, a lot of times they're going to pull back out to that safe zone, that little bit of deeper water just out from where they want to spawn. So one thing that helps me and will help a lot of people if they fish the same waters on a regular basis, they kind of know where those fish go to spawn, those little pockets or flats or wherever those fish go to spawn. During those 3 seasons, pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn, everything is built around that little area where those fish go to spawn. And then you backtrack. If the fish are, about to come in, they're just outside of there. And when they're done, they're gonna go right back out just outside of that area, to start getting on the shad and things like that. So that's a good way to sort of be confident, in this area and how to adjust, with a small area where those fish spawn or the types of pockets those fish spawn in, and you can backtrack depending on the conditions. But that's the key, is knowing that little bit of deeper water is a little bit of safe zone, or a fairly shallow type reservoir or even a river. Sometimes 4 feet of water is enough, that those fish can pull back to. A Highlands Lake, like I grew up on Lake Martin, or maybe we're going to Lake Norman for Redcrest coming up. It might be like a 10 to 15 feet zone that they might want to pull out to because the water's a little more clear.
Gotcha. So what baits post-spawn, pre-spawn, and during the spawn, what's your go-to bait? Say it's clear or dirty water.
Yeah. Clear water pre-spawn, I love a jerk bait, especially with forward sonar. And, I know everybody's got mixed feelings on forward sonar, man. I caught fish for years, and the only thing I didn't realize is how many were looking at my bait and didn't eat it, before. So now it's probably even more frustrating, at least before I didn't know. I just, thought hoping they were looking at it, but now I know, I just had a fish follow my bait all the way to the boat and didn't eat it, and sometimes that can help. You can adjust, bait and color selection, but crank baits, jerk baits, and, if you need to slow down, things like jigs or even Ned rigs, things like that, are really good for those fish that are staging out on that, where it's a little bit cooler, cooler temps, things like that. And as it warms up, the water temperature warms up, those fish, their metabolism is going to start to pick up, and they're going to realize, okay, we're about to spawn, time to put on a few pounds because it's going to be a rough month or so here. We're going to burn a lot of calories. So they come in, if you get the right conditions, you can start chunking, vibrating jigs and spinner baits and swim jigs and swim baits and things like that, moving baits, and target those aggressive fish that are ready to get a good meal before they set up on the spawn. And then when they set up to spawn, it almost flip flops and goes back to the opposite of, hey, I've got to slow down and be, really, methodical and soak my bait in around certain targets, because those fish they're not looking to eat anymore. They're just looking to defend the nest. And so you've got to keep that bait around, a possible target where those fish could be spawning for a longer period of time. And then once they're done, they go back and it's time to feed up again. A lot of times you have a shad spawn going on. You got the bluegill are coming in to spawn. Bluegill have been pestering the nest, all during the bass spawn. And so when the bluegill get ready to go, the bass return the favor and start eating them. And so it's a great way to catch a big bass is, targeting, areas with bluegill beds and shad spawn. And sometimes that time of year, you can do a little bit of that shad spawn in the morning and go to the bluegill bite in the afternoon. And it's a great way to catch some of those big post spawn females.
I like it. That was some awesome insight there. And you hit it on it a little bit with Redcrest coming up. And just so you know, this podcast is going to be aired after Redcrest.
Okay.
So don't feel like you're giving away any secrets here.
Yeah.
What's your mindset going into that tournament?
I'm excited about it. I grew up fishing Lake Martin here in Alabama, and I've been to a few, several different highland fisheries over the years, fishing on different tours. I've always felt like Lake Norman was one of the closest things I'd ever seen to Lake Martin. And so I'm confident for that reason that I know how to fish that type of fishery. It's sort of like a highland fishery, but it's a little bit flat, not like an Ozark lake where you got a lot of bluffs and bluff ends and arms. It's more sprawling and flat, long flat points, and a lot of docks, which I love to do. So I feel really comfortable going into that type of fishery. They've got a good mix of largemouth and also the spotted bass. And those are one of my favorites, especially here in Alabama. We've got the Alabama spot. A lot of people know them as Coosa spots that get really big. And I like them because they're not quite as smart as the largemouth. They're just so aggressive. So I love spotted bass and smallmouth because, it's more a matter of finding them, and being able to fish, aggressively and trigger those bites. And so I'm excited about it. I think Norman's going to be a mix between quality spotted bass. Anytime you go to a fishery like that, you'll catch a whole bunch of spots. But the key is being able to get those quality fish, those, 2.5 pound spots up to 4 pounds, and then having a way that, hey, I could go catch me a couple of big largemouth, 3 to maybe even 6 pound largemouth. I think whoever can do that consistently is going to win. The hardest thing on a highland fishery is they don't like pressure. It's not one of those situations where you go into one area and you bang that area all day, every day of the tournament, and you come out a winner. It's more pattern fishing. So you gotta understand why those fish are setting up where they are, and you've got to be able to look at a map. For me, look at my Garmin Lakeview maps and be able to make good decisions based on that, and be open to running new water. I think that's going to be the key. Is if I were to win, or whoever wins, I would say is probably by the end of that tournament is going to run a lot of new water, but have a really solid pattern that they can fish pinpoint, confident type targets.
Absolutely. Well, I hope when this podcast airs, you won it, and then we'll get you back on the podcast to talk about you winning Redcrest.
Heck yeah. Hopefully I'll have that big red trophy right here on my hip.
Absolutely, man. All right, let's wrap it up here. I always like asking the Bass Pro guys what their PB largemouth is, smallmouth, and then if you want spotted bass too, since I know you fish them a lot.
Yeah, PB largemouth. I've caught 2 10-pounders in my life. Both of them were in Florida, and both of them were in tournaments. So, a lot of times we catch the big one in practice, and then we can't get. That's what happened at Toho this recently. But yeah, I caught a 10.5 at the Harris Chain. Got to see it all happen. It was such a rush. Spotted bass, pushing 6 pounds. Here I don't know exactly what it weighed, but we've caught so many 5-pounders, 5+s here around the house. It's pretty cool. And smallmouth is pushing 6 pounds. I don't know that I've got one over 6 yet. And I'm surprised because I've been to some of the best smallmouth fisheries in the world, but that 5.5 pound mark for the smallies is just so hard to get over, But yeah, pushing 6 pounds. I think that was St. Lawrence River, and that one was in practice.
Nice. Very nice. I'm actually going up to the St. Lawrence River this summer, so hopefully I can run into a 6-pounder up there.
There and there.
Cool, Greg. I appreciate it. Why don't you let everyone that's listening know where to follow you at and all your social medias, and keep along with your story and your progress as you continue your career?
Well, there's not a whole lot of Greg Vinson professional anglers out there, so that's a good way to find me. You can just Google it, and I'm on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and gregvinson.com is the website, so it's easy to remember. Instagram, of course. Instagram, I'm Roosterfish. So one of the nicknames over the years I've gotten for having red hair was the Rooster. And so that's on Instagram, it's Roosterfish. So hope you guys will go check it out.
Cool. Greg, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for jumping on this podcast. And down the road, after the season, maybe, hopefully get you back on for another one.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Eric.
You just listened to the Fishing Fanatics podcast with your host, Eric Stewart. Feel free to check out our other podcasts and our other interviews on our channel on Spotify, YouTube, and much more. Check out our Instagram page, TikTok, and Facebook as well.